You have to write down like literally what was in your brain right before the beep. And I went into this study thinking that, it's always, I feel like I always have like little snippets of songs running through my head and like not much else. And when I did this study, like I think they only caught a song one time. Most of the time I am just existing and there's nothing really of much consequence going on in my mind except for like experiencing. So I'm like, well, I was taking in the green of that leaf.
Join the Discovering Your Mind Facebook group and enjoy discussions, ask questions, and participate in the podcast in fun and unique ways. Aphantasia is a condition characterized by an inability to visualize mental images in one's mind. If you have just discovered that you or someone you love has aphantasia, or if you're just fascinated by the subject in general and love learning more about it, you are in the right place. The Discovering Your Mind podcast delves into all aspects of the mind's eye, including aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and everything in between. Welcome to the Discovering Your Mind podcast, brought to you by shanesbraindomain.com. I am your host, Shane Williams, also known as Shane's Brain, and today we're talking with the one and only Sadie Dingfelder. Welcome to the show, Sadie.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. I'm excited about this one. I think it's going to be fun and interesting.
Awesome.
All right. Well, where are you joining us from, Sadie?
West Virginia.
Oh, West Virginia.
Mountain Mama.
All right. Tell us what you do for a living.
I'm a writer. I worked for the American Psychological Association, and I ran their magazines for a while. And I reported on science news, and then I went and worked at the Washington Post for a while. And then I got laid off, as everyone eventually does in journalism, and I got a book deal. And so then that was my job for a while. Now I'm writing for magazines and trying to get a second book deal.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. What about your other hobbies and interests? What else do you like to do?
I love scuba diving and snorkeling. Basically, I just want to be in water all the time. I like kayaking and swimming and just sitting in ponds.
All right, cool. Well, let's move on. I just finished your book yesterday. Why don't you tell people a little bit about what your book is called and how it happened and just a little bit about your book.
Yeah. Well, so my book is called Do I Know You? A Faceblind Reporter's Journey into the Science of Sight, Memory, and Imagination. And the subtitle is important because there is literally another book called Do I Know You? About face blindness that came out 2 months before my book.
Oh, really?
I was so upset because my book had been finished for like more than a year. It takes forever for things to get published for some reason. And so my book is about how I discovered at the age of 39, right before I turned 40, that I'm face blind, which is something called prosopagnosia. And it was really a huge surprise to me to learn that I was just really failing at recognizing faces at a level that I just had no idea. I thought I was doing fine. I knew that I was below average. I didn't think I was good at faces, but bottom 2% is a lot different than a little below average, right? And then from there, it sort of becomes like a mystery story because I try to find out why I'm face blind, because it's not genetic in my case, I think. And then I discover all of these other ways in which I'm neurodivergent, including aphantasia and SDAM, which often goes along with aphantasia. So that's severely deficient autobiographical memory. So my book is just me sort of doing this mystery sort of hunt, which involves interrogating my parents about my early childhood, and they get a little defensive. And I go to science labs across the country, and it turns out my brain is interesting and weird enough to interest at least 5 or 6 different groups of scientists who all scan my brain. There's one woman who was writing her entire PhD dissertation on me getting lost everywhere. Yeah. Wow. So for almost 40 years, I thought that I was pretty neurotypical, pretty average. And it turns out that my brain is not operating normally in a lot of ways. And I had no idea. So, and honestly, in in human society in general, you don't kind of want to stick out. And we all kind of do assume that our inner lives are roughly the same as anyone else's and our abilities are roughly the same as other people's, right? But it turns out, as you know, like most people have very different inner lives and sort of cognitive abilities there's a lot more variety than people realized. If you happen to be on the tails and you're making the assumption that everyone's thinking roughly like you, you're super wrong. Like you're wrong all the time about everyone. And that was like the big eye-opening thing for me, is that my version of sort of human consciousness is not normal. It's not typical.
Okay, very cool. So there were kind of four main topics that I found in your book that I want to discuss one by one. So the first one was face blindness. The second one was stereo blindness. The third one was aphantasia. And the fourth one was SDAM.
Yeah.
So let's start with face blindness. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to say about kind of defining that? Like, what is it?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting. Face blindness just means that you are not remembering faces and processing them as efficiently as normal people, as neurotypical people. But an important thing to know is that neurotypical people are super weirdly good at faces. Every human, even faceblind people, are born with a sort of a basic face template that allows your brain to makes your brain latch onto faces right as soon as you're born. Again, even if you're like autistic and you aren't as into faces as a neurotypical person, you're still way more into faces than almost any other type of animal. Primates in general. So we all latch onto faces, we focus on faces, and we learn how to process faces probably quicker than any other type of object. And we have two whole chunks of brain that are about the size of an olive above each of your ears that are 100% devoted to face processing. So faces are really important to the human brain, like just so important, because at some point in, human evolution, it just became very helpful to be able to keep track of like who your allies are, who doesn't like you, that kind of thing became very important, and less important to like be able to identify plants, though we can do that too, obviously. But like we have a whole chunk of brain devoted to identifying other human beings. And so people who are face blind are often actually just sort of treating faces like we all treat other types of objects. So like if you had to pick a squirrel out of a lineup of squirrels that you saw a squirrel yesterday, you have to pick a squirrel out of a lineup today. Like almost no one can do that. Almost no one can do that, right? That's the experience of being face blind, is like you can see faces just as clearly as anyone, right? Like mostly our vision is fine. It's usually our processing or our memory that is failing. So for some people, it's there's two main types of face blindness, but there's probably actually a lot more. Where there's one type where your brain is not encoding faces efficiently or well, and it's kind of wild because if you look at a face, it's a complicated 3D sort of figure, and most people can take this frontal face idea, and when you turn to the side, they can still recognize the person. So you've created like a workable 3D model in your mind. And that's something that I can't do at all. And then the other half of it is when you see that face again, can you go into your memory and match it to like this other face, and then to the whole identity of a person, which is kind of like a whole nother level of memory. So it's just a very complicated thing our brains do, but most people are so effortless at it, they don't even realize how computationally difficult it is.
Right. Okay, so I know you had a lot of experiences that kind of gave you maybe a clue that you were a little face blind. Tell your story about how you're like, okay, this is more than I thought it was.
Yeah. So what happened was I was grocery shopping with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, but we'll just call him Steve. And I was just tailing him around the store, and I kind of lost track for him for a minute. And then when I found him again, he had just gone completely rogue, and he was putting all this junk food in our cart. And he also was putting some generic peanut butter into the cart. And that's what I chose to like grab back out of the cart. And I was like, since when do you buy generic? And he looked back at me and he looked terrified. And, my husband's like 6'4", and you just don't see him looking scared very often. And so I was like, thought like something terrifying was behind me. Like I literally looked behind me to see what was scaring my Steve. And there was no one behind me because he was terrified of me because he was not Steve. He was just some guy who was like shaped like Steve, you know, and he had like the exact same jacket. I feel like that was like the exact same thing. And yeah, so I dropped the peanut butter. I was really embarrassed and I ran off. And then it was like really in the car on the way home, I said to myself, you know what, this is not a normal kind of mistake. Like this would, like my first thought is like, this is going to be a really good, funny story because I collect funny stories about myself. And I always just thought that I was just hilarious. Like I didn't think any deeper than like, I write these funny stories and I'm hilarious, you know? But that was the first time that I thought a little bit deeper and I'm like, why are you making these weird mistakes that normal people don't make? And so that sent me down this whole rabbit hole that became my book.
Okay. So why do you think it was so hard for you to convince yourself that you were face blind?
Oh, it was so hard. And it's still hard. Okay. So what's wild is that, okay, so I write this whole book and I have like an official stamp of face blindness from Harvard. And I write this whole book about face processing and how I'm really failing at it. But at some level, I still don't believe it. Like, you know how you can know something, but it's different than knowing it, if that makes any sense. Like really knowing it and having integrated it into all your other information about yourself. So it's like, I knew I was face blind, but it was just in its own sort of like compartment in my brain. And then I would do something that was super weird. Like I would fail to recognize my brother when I was waiting for him. And I would say, like, I would do that. And I'd be like, wow, I'm really face blind. You know, my husband's like, yeah, you wrote a book about it. You have some pins you made yourself. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. That's true. So I don't know. I guess it's just like at a certain age, you have a conception of yourself as basically whatever you believe, right? So for me, I mean, again, like basically normal. I think most of us think we're basically normal, honestly. And coming to terms with the fact that you are not normal at all is just kind of hard. I mean, I don't think that I have a lot of internalized stigma around neurodivergence, but maybe I do, you know?
You mentioned this briefly already, but I found it interesting in your book. You talked about the difference between human faces versus animal faces.
Yeah.
And objects versus faces. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I used squirrels as an example earlier, but it's actually not the best example because squirrels don't tell each other apart by faces. They tell each other apart by their scent. And that's actually how most mammals do it, where most mammals are very scent focused and they care more about scent than about vision. I sometimes think like, yeah, so dogs, for instance, like if you imagine the world visually, because that's a good analogy because we're visual animals. They're smell animals. But so if you imagine smell from a vision perspective, it's like a long exposure photograph because they can see things that were there yesterday, like the hot dog you dropped on the ground, you know, or the dog that peed on the curb like 2 days ago. It's almost like they can see the faint fading image of things that used to be there. So most animals are scent focused, but primates and humans are very vision focused. And so most primates can tell other primates apart by their faces. But other animals, their faces don't vary that much. Like statistically, the distance between their eyes, the distance from their nose to their ears, all those things do not vary a lot. So penguins actually do all look alike to other penguins. We're not just being species, but they sound different to each other. Penguins tell each other apart by their voices. So yeah, so this is like a real primate sort of obsession is faces. But other primates, the other naked primates, actually tell each other apart by their butts more than their faces, more often, I think. And so this one researcher, I feel like she was somewhere like Sweden or something. This is just not research that I could imagine getting funded or approved in America. But she actually tested whether humans and monkeys could tell apart and how they were telling apart faces versus butts, basically. And so they showed, and these are human faces and human butts shown to monkeys and humans. So the monkeys were great. They could tell humans apart by their butts. And yeah, but humans can't tell humans apart by our butts very well.
Right.
And the way they test this is really funny because the control is the flipped upside down, right? So like a right side up face is like what you're testing. And then your control condition is the same face, but flipped upside down, because that actually just makes it, and it just sort of throws your visual recognition system for a loop, and it makes it a lot harder to recognize people. So that's another good way to get the experience of being face blind, is to look at a celebrity face upside down, and it should be harder to identify upside down.
All right. Tell us about super recognizers.
Oh yeah, super recognizers. They're just the opposite end of the normal curve than the face blind people. So they're the people in the top 2%. And honestly, they're still a bit of a mystery to scientists. They don't really know how they do it. So super recognizers are people who almost literally never forget a face. So if they see you on the bus, like, you know, in like 2012, and then they like see you like at a grocery store in 2026, like they'd be like, oh, there's that woman from the bus. And so it's just wild to me. Their brain just like automatically captures and stores face information, and it's so effortless for them. And so they actually end up doing the opposite of what I end up doing, because I'm constantly pretending that I know people that I don't know, to the point where it doesn't even feel weird to me. You know, like I'm just like, hey, you like, and so I've had to very consciously try to just not lie to people. And I also have a button that I made myself to try to make myself stop lying to people all the time that I know them. And it says, I'm face blind. I'm just pretending to know who you are. Because it's true. Like I'm just lying all the time. And people don't realize it. The super recognizers, they are going around pretending not to recognize people all the time because they freak people out. People are like, are you stalking me? Like, why do you know my name? You know, or whatever. Another thing that's really impressive about super recognizers is they can see through age. You know, like if they see like a kid and then they see that kid as an adult, like they often just make that connection immediately. They had a super recognizer unit in the London police. There's another fancier name for the London police, right? It's like the London Guard or something. Anyway, whatever they're called. The London police had like a super recognizer unit that they actually specifically used for a very unglamorous sort of job, which is they were given like just a lot of sort of closed camera footage from like luxury stores and things. Cause like there would be people, they had all this footage, but no one could, like, it was useless footage kind of, cause no one knew who the person was. And so they'd look through like a book of, you know, wanted shoplifters. And then they'd look at the CCTV footage and just like rack up other like sort of crimes for them. And then like the one guy came in cause he like tried to stiff a cab driver money, like, and he ended up like fighting the cab driver, and he gets brought into the police office. And the super recognizer there was like, oh, like she had already flagged him, I think. And she was like, yeah, he's like wanted for millions of dollars of like luxury goods stolen from around London. And they caught him because of the super recognizer unit.
That is so interesting. I noticed in your book too, that, you know, when you were trying to tell your dad about certain things, it seemed like, for lack of a better word, he kind of defaulted to skepticism.
Yeah.
You know, like making excuses like, oh, maybe you're just tired, or you're not trying hard enough.
Or paying attention, yeah.
Or paying attention. And those kind of things are rampant in the world of aphantasia as well.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about your thoughts. Like, why do we tend to default to skepticism?
You know, I feel like for a parent, it kind of does make sense to feel that way when your kid is a kid, right? Because when my brain was still like quite plastic, if someone had noticed that I wasn't doing faces very well, like maybe it could have been remediated. But what you end up in is a feedback loop where it's not clear. Like eventually whatever your thing is gets sort of braided into the way your brain works. And at that point, it's like kind of too late. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, when I told my dad I was like a certifiably face blind and he didn't believe me, he was still like, you know, oh, you're just not trying hard enough. You don't look at people's faces. But that's not true, right? So like because relatively early in my life, I was not able to get the information I needed from faces, and I wasn't getting much information from it. I started looking elsewhere, I started looking at context, at clothes, at hair. And at this point, it's like a hardwired kind of thing. So you could definitely, if you look at me, like I'm not necessarily even trying like to recognize faces sometimes, but it's because a long time ago, I learned there was much better strategies for me, given my brain wiring, basically. So it's also, so for a parent, like if there's something that you want your kid to be better at, and you can give them a way to try harder, or a reason to try harder, or like a new strategy that could actually change their life, and that could change their abilities. But like at the point where your kid's like 40 years old, you just need to be like, okay, like I guess you never learned to recognize faces, Right. But my dad was very in contact with my day-to-day sort of learning disabilities, because face recognition it's actually like kind of a visual learning disability. It's like dyslexia, but for faces instead of for words, because you're processing it wrong, or you're not processing it efficiently, and you're not connecting it to the meaning that you want to be connecting it to. Anyway, I had like a lot of other things that definitely should have counted as learning disorders, but no one really had names for it. And I just like could not learn the multiplication tables. And I remember my dad made this huge poster for me. He was so proud of it. It was very well drawn in. And he was like, look, like, because he did it so that you only had like one product. So like 2 times 4 is the same as 4 times 2 or whatever. He was like, look, it's the same. And you only have to learn half as many or whatever it was. And I was like, I'm not learning any of this. And again, like I was trying, but it just memorizing numbers without context means nothing to me. And I can't hold numbers in my head for very long.
All right. Well, cool. That is a great explanation about the skepticism. I really like that explanation for that. So thank you. What about science? How can science squelch skepticism? What is the science behind face blindness?
People are always very convinced by brain scans and sort of neurological explanations. But the thing is that honestly, neuroscience is such a young science that we don't actually really know how anything works yet. So we also don't know how anything goes wrong, but you still see a lot of neuroscience-based explanations and like sort of modern media. Like everyone with ADHD thinks they have like a dopamine limitation, like not enough dopamine or whatever, right? And that's definitely not the problem. You have the right amount of dopamine unless you have like MS or something, Parkinson's. But anyway, with the faceblind researchers, face blindness is a very sneaky problem. And so when I post videos that are like, if you can't follow a movie, like you're probably face blind. Like if all the characters in the movie look the same to you, that's like the number one sign of face blindness, because mass media makes media for the masses. And 98% of people can keep track of characters just based on their faces. And if they get a haircut, it's not a huge deal. If they put on a hat or put on makeup, not a huge deal for most people. But for faceblind people, it is a huge deal because it gets past all of our secret hacks, right? Because you have all of these hacks and you don't even know. You don't even know how you develop them or what they are or when you're employing them, I think most of the time. And so these scientists have figured out ways to get around our hacks, basically. And so when I went and did my face recognition testing, I was given so many different types of tests that basically the idea is just to bombard people until like they find the weaknesses in your sort of defense system, because we're all really good at faking it or sort of figuring out faces from context or whatever else. And then it's really fluky too. And you think you're crazy. So like one time my friend Dan just told me that like he had just come to my book talk and I had talked all about how I'm face blind, blah, blah, blah. And then I recognized him at like 10 yards in a parade that I was not expecting to see him at. Right. And that's the hardest thing, is like not expecting to see someone. And then I see my friend Dan walking in a parade that I didn't know he was in, juggling, probably in an outfit. And he was like, Sadie's a fraud. Like she just but like, who knows? Maybe it was how he moved, maybe, I don't know how I did it either. It's really fluky. And, right. So the thing that scientists bring to the table, I think, is the complexity, right? Like they're like, you know what? There's a lot of ways to be face blind. Like to pick any two face blind people at random, and they might be failing at completely different parts of the face recognition and retrieval process. Yeah, brains are so complicated and so interesting. And all of our big buckets like ADHD and autism and even face blindness, which feels very narrow, they have so much heterogeneity that they are not mapping into the physical reality of our brains. It's not a one-to-one map at all. And it may not be mappable in any realistic way in the long run.
Right. That's why I always tell people you are 100% unique.
Yeah. Though, you know, a lot of times people just sort of overgeneralize. I feel like my mom just texted me this the other day and she's like, well, there's nothing normal. No one's normal. And I'm like, okay, no one's exactly the same as anyone else, but most people are in that big part of the hump of the normal curve, like, which is to say within 2 standard deviations, like that's still pretty broad, right? But if you're within 2 standard deviations on any given trait, you're probably within 2 standard deviations on almost all the other traits, right? The people who hang out in the tails tend to hang out in the tails across domains. And so that means that like, if it was possible, you know, to like look at the standard deviation of standard deviations, basically, the people in the tails are in the tails. And so we're the weirdos. Like, you know, everyone's unique. Everyone's special. We're not like, I'm not saying we're cooler or whatever, but there are weirdos. We're in the tails and we are having a different experience than everyone else.
Right. But even within the quote unquote normal people, like what I do on this podcast is I just ask people questions, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter where they're at. Every interview is unique. And I hear things I've never heard before from normal people. Right?
Yeah.
And
the human experience is vast for sure.
That's what I love about it is, you know, science can make these groups and make these generalizations and decide these certain things. But there are all these little details that you miss unless you focus on the person sitting in front of you and just listen to what they say.
It's all like point of view kind of and like magnitude questions. Because on the other hand, if you cut open any of our brains, like our Wernicke's area, like that does language is always basically in the same spot. Like that's kind of wild, you know? So in some ways, like actually humans are almost identical. And like if you were an alien coming from, you know, outer space and learning about animals, like you might think like animals are all basically the same because we have so much of our DNA in common or whatever else.
And we think that about ourselves. Everybody I've ever talked to about this, I just thought everybody thought the way I did or visualized the way I did.
I'm glad to know that because like I feel like that is not appreciated. And when you probably came across this in my book, but like this is not just ordinary modern people doing this. This is throughout time, all of the greatest thinkers assumed that everyone else was thinking like them. And so Freud thought everyone was pervy, you know, like, and Skinner thought that everyone had aphantasia, just like him. Plato and Aristotle, like, thought that people like visualizing was the only way to think, or words were the only way to think, you know, so everyone just thought that their experience was basically the same as everyone else's. And I think that's so wild because it's so not true. As soon as you start talking to people. And so why did it take us so long to realize that? This is something science brings, is that it's helping people believe other people's reports about their inner experience. So if I say, listen, guys, I can't visualize, a lot of people would just be like, well, we're probably talking about different things or whatever.
Right. It's just a language thing.
Right. Language. Because we don't have a great vocabulary for talking about inner experiences. And so I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm not visualizing. So the scientists could come in and they can see that you're not using your brain the same way other people are, right? Like they can do fMRI and see your visual areas are not lighting up when you're imagining. I have great pictures of my brain not lighting up when I'm imagining, but lighting up exactly right when I'm actually seeing faces or places or whatever. There was an amazing article that literally came out like 2 days ago that like in my perfect world would have been a front page story, but I guess there's more important news or whatever, where they've tapped individual neurons in brains And I'm just like, I think this is so wild because these are human beings that are seeing and imagining. And they figured out basically the math program that their brain was using to encode the information at an individual neuron like level. And then they could decode it so they could have the person imagine that thing. And they could put it like they could say, oh, they're imagining a smiley face or whatever. So you're literally using the exact same neurons firing in the exact same way. Not all of the same neurons. It's actually a subset when you are visualizing an object.
Wow.
But we're not doing any of that, right? Our brains are like, nope, we're not going to be doing that.
Have you ever heard of Dr. Ellen Langer? So she has this little thing that I just really love. I'm going to show it real quick, and I want to get your thoughts on it.
So I'm at this horse event, and this man asked me, can I watch his horse for him because he wants to get a hot dog for the horse? No one knows better, as well, but not better than I. Horses don't eat meat. But being nice, I said, of course. He came back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And at that moment, I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. Now, what people need to understand is that all of our facts, virtually all of our facts, come from science. Right. They come from experiments. But experiments can only give us probabilities. That if I were to do this exact same thing, and you can never do it exactly the same way, any experiment, but if I were to do it exactly the same way, I'm likely to get these results. These kinds of horses, given this amount of meat, tend not to eat the meat. It's much easier to say horses don't eat meat, but it's wrong. And because all of the facts were given, all of these absolutes, we believe we know. If we know, we don't need to tune in. And so, many people, I think, if they saw they were wrong, as I did in that moment, would feel bad, would worry. I was ecstatic because that opened up a world of possibilities. That means everything I thought couldn't be, maybe it could be.
That's a great way to look at it. But you know what I think she missed out on, though, is that most research is called nomothetic, and it's looking at averages, and it's looking at a big group of animals and actually trying to smooth out the individual differences. And what we're talking about is individual differences. And you can do research that is actually focused in on what these differences are. And it's usually called like idiographic research. But people in general are most interested in the averages, but that actually flattens out a huge amount of interesting and meaningful variation. So so that horse is probably in the tail, right? Like most horses don't eat meat, but that horse maybe loves meat, and so that horse is in that 2% that usually gets sort of flattened out when you're looking at averages.
Right. And that's why I think both are very important. We need the sciences, we need the averages, but don't forget about the horse that can eat meat, because it doesn't matter who I interview, they say something I never heard before. Happens every single time. So I love the averages, but I love to get to those unique things that we all experience and that we all have, that we all assume are normal, and everybody does it this way.
Yeah.
I love to pull those out. And what happens a lot of times is I will ask somebody a question about how they experience something internally. Mm-hmm. And instead of answering me about their experience, they will start talking about research.
No, funny. That's funny.
Right?
Yeah.
Or I need to research that more, or they say this, and I wonder why so many people tend to default to something they read somewhere once rather than what they're actually experiencing themselves.
I bet that, I would assume that those are the people who are kind of like me, are not paying a lot of attention to their internal experience. Those are people, honestly, this is my bias. I like averages. I like research, and I do not introspect very much. And I actually totally thought introspection was mostly garbage until I wrote this whole book. And I was really, really impressed with these scientists that are led by Russell Hurlburt, because they do this extremely idiographic, individual focused investigation into internal experiences. They give you a beeper the beeper like beeps you at random during the day, you have to write down the contents of your consciousness right before it beeped, right? So you don't want to say, oh, I heard the beep and I thought about whatever. You have to write down like literally what was in your brain right before the beep. And I went into this study thinking that, it's always, I feel like I always have like little snippets of songs running through my head and like not much else. And when I did this study, like I think they only caught a song one time. Most of the time I am just existing and there's nothing really of much consequence going on in my mind except for like experiencing. So I'm like, well, I was taking in the green of that leaf, or I was like looking at the triangle of the bark or whatever, like a lot of nature looking. I look at nature a lot and just look at it. It's not like I don't do anything with it. Right. So anyway, this is all to say that like Russell, he's like, no one really actually knows about their inner experience that well, because the notable things are the things you remember, the nightmare you had, or the song that is in your head so much it's annoying the shit out of you. But like my actual day-to-day moment is just like, I see a green tree or whatever, and then, but other people have totally different ones. And what he found is like, if you have like a psychological problem, you often have like a busy brain. Like specifically, I think it was bulimics or anorexic people. This one woman, he's like, this is a one person study. And that's why this is not done very much, right? Because it's like you end up with like a very detailed sort of description of this one human being's like inner life. But what does that mean in like the larger context? How is that applicable to anyone else? It's a very labor intensive process too. They found though that like in a set of, I don't know, maybe like a few dozen people with anorexia or bulimia, they did tend to have like a lot more like going on, like 2 or 3 internal monologues at the same time, like with dialogue like interweaving together. And anyway, so I thought that was really wild because that's like so different from me, where I basically never have any conscious experience. And like there's some people who their heads are just buzzing with things, and it seems like it would be very distracting.
Right. I totally resonate with the nothing thing. When people ask me to describe it, that's what I say. I say it is closer to nothing than it is to something.
These scientists are so rigorous. They actually described like 6 different levels of nothingness that my brain would do. So like, it's like, I know that I'm spaced out, or I don't even realize that I'm like not thinking about anything, or I'm thinking about something, but I don't know exactly what it is, or I'm thinking about something and I do know what it is, but only after the fact or something like that. They really like mapped it out. Right. But this is actually to your other point, which is that language loves categories, right? People will be like, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert. But like, unless you're in the bottom or top 2%, you are not. You are like, maybe you're like a 40%, like, right. You're 40% extrovert and 60, whatever. But we don't have words for that. And people just do like categories. And I think language in general just likes categories. Is that a chair or not a chair? We don't want like, that's chair-ish, that's chair adjacent.
Right. And going back to that research you were talking about, that's exactly the type of research that I do.
Yeah. The
podcast is called Discovering Your Mind. I interview someone, I ask them questions, and I call that episode Discovering the Mind of So-and-so. And so it is a very personal thing. You can't really gain averages from that or conclusions from it. The only conclusion I come from it is everyone's unique, right? Because I just get all these beautiful descriptions about how they do things or how they think or how this shows up or how their mind smells in this situation or not in that one. And it just goes on and on and on. And so I kind of love just delving into that area of who knows what we're going to uncover and who knows what it means, but I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm just not that introspective. So it was a very weird experience for me to do this deep dive into my own mind with all of these scientists, and sort of to learn how scientists are beginning to describe subjective experience objectively. I think that's like the coolest thing, because that's all when I like signed up for psychology, all I want to know is what it's like to be someone else. What is it like to be you? What is it like to be a dog? What is it like to be a bat? Like I want to know what it's like what's the texture of the experience? What would it be like if I turned into a bat tomorrow? And that's exactly sort of the area that psychology, when they were trying to be a serious science, just carved right out. They were like, we don't worry about that. Like, we're interested in behavior because we can measure it. But now clever scientists are figuring out how to make measurements of things of behavior that is indicative of your inner life. Like, reflexes like your irises contracting or expanding.
Do you have aphantasia? Embrace your superpower and help spread awareness and style with Shane's Brain's new line of aphantasia-themed t-shirts and other merch, available on shanesbraindomain.com and Amazon.
Okay, side tangent over. Let's get back to face blindness here real quick.
Okay.
What are some misconceptions people have about face blindness?
I mean, honestly, it's the consistency. People think that we never can recognize faces, but actually we just have a shaky representation of faces. So in the right lighting, in the right context, we can recognize faces, but we don't have that really impressive, robust, almost photographic memory that normal humans have, which is, again, just wild how good normal people are at this compared to other animals or even compared to other types of objects. Anyway, so that's a big misconception. And then another one is all the people who are face blind, I swear to God, they will email me and they'll be like, well, I can't follow movies, but I think I'm just mildly face blind. If you think you're mildly face blind, you should definitely take a test because you're probably freaking super face blind like me. No one is underestimating how face blind they are. I feel like if you think you might be below average on this, you're probably super below average. That's my bias perhaps. But also people think that you maybe see faces as blurry or you can't see faces at all. And that's just not it. It's just like dyslexic people. They can see the letters. They're just not processing it as efficiently as neurotypical people. And that's also something that's a bigger thing is that we don't realize how much of our world, of the objective world that you live in, is your brain making educated guesses and getting it wrong a lot of the time. And so if you have a bit of a weird visual processing quirk of any kind, you actually get to experience the world being constructed in your conscious world. And you get actually see the glitch in the matrix in a way that I think neurotypical people don't get to see. I've seen a rock transform into a horse, or a horse into a rock actually, or a deer into a rock specifically, right before my eyes. And that's the kind of mistake your brain actually really loves to cover up, because your brain is you didn't see that. That was not it. This is it, seriously, your brain is your conscious experience of the world. Your brain wants it to be smooth and predictable and not scary and not weird. And this is why, if you take drugs, so that unravels and all of a sudden things you're seeing are not making sense. You might actually be tapping into an earlier point in your perception before your brain has just smoothed it out, All
right. Very interesting. I think you've already highlighted a couple of these, but can you identify some upsides and some downsides to being face blind?
Yeah. The upsides are mostly the result of compensations that you just develop magically or by accident. So for me, and for actually, I think in general, most face blind people just get more comfortable with ambiguity than normal people have to get. Because if you never are 100% sure who you're talking to, you're just probabilistic on it, which is the case, honestly. Even with my husband in my house, I'm assuming that it's my husband who's in my house, the tall, hairy guy. But someone could play a really mean prank on me. They really could. So I'm not 100% certain that it's always him. So I think that we are just a little in the world that we live in the current world where things happen that you didn't even think could possibly happen, I think it actually is a real strength to be able, just actually the woman whose clip you just showed, to revise. If you're horses don't eat meat and then you see a horse eat meat, if you are someone who is used to just quickly revising, oh, I'm talking to my brother. No, I'm talking to my cousin or whatever. we can revise on the run and not give away that it was a surprise, and maybe not be surprised by revisions as much. I think that's actually a real strength in the world that Faceblind people, at least I got, and maybe other Faceblind people too. And then the other, and this is something I've heard from a lot of people, is generic friendliness that is convincing is actually like super helpful to in a lot of different careers. Like there's a Faceblind politician, which is wild to me because like, how can you be a Faceblind politician, you know? But he does it and he's great. John Hickenlooper from Colorado, I think he's a senator. I assume he's still in office. He's just generically friendly and like he doesn't treat anyone like they're more important than anyone else, you know? So if he's talking to someone and like another senator walks into the room, he doesn't like drop the random person. Like he's just as interested in that person. In Washington, D.C., there's like a joke that like people are always looking over your shoulder for someone more important. But Faceblind people, we're not doing that. Like same in Hollywood. Like we don't know who you are. So we treat everyone with equal respect.
Awesome. Beautiful insights there. I love those. Other than not being able to follow plots of movies, what are some other signs and symptoms that you might have face blindness? I
love doing this for children in particular because parents do not realize. I mean, like children who look lost at school pickup, who look lost who can't find their friends on the playground, who avoid using people's names and who don't recognize people out of context. All of those things are classic. So if you're someone who has failed to recognize like your roommate in the store when you weren't expecting to see her or something like that, like you're probably face blind. And I have tests. If people want to find out, there's tests linked from my website that are real university tests, or you can just Google and try to find some. The other signs, really the best sign is like if you can't follow movies or television shows and you think all the actors look basically the same.
Okay. Just to wrap up on the face blindness thing, are there any additional tips and tricks to navigating life with face blindness?
You know, the thing is like most people who are face blind do not know it. Right. So if you're an adult and you're face blind, you've probably already developed a whole suite of compensations and ways to like get through your life. But tips I've seen people trading online, like maybe tips that people didn't think about. So a lot of moms or parents who have kids and they have to pick them up at school, like feel like bad parents because they can't find their kids. Right. And so what some parents do is they make their kids wear like very bright accessories or bright clothing. Oh, and similarly, if you have a kid who's face blind, like do not make that kid deal with uniforms. Like don't send them to a school that has uniforms or a sports team that requires uniforms. Like it's really, that just makes life impossible for them if you can avoid it. Closed captions on television. It's so great that everyone's just using closed captions all the time now. It really makes life easier for a lot of people. That's called the like ramp effect, I think, or the curb cut effect, is when you make life easier for one group of people, like wheelchair users, by cutting ramps into curbs. All of a sudden you're helpful to a lot of other people too, like people with strollers or, you know, people with shopping carts or whatever else.
Right.
So fat people. Yeah. I don't like a curb. I like to go down a ramp.
There you go. Yeah, me too. All right. What is stereo blindness?
Stereo blindness. So a lot of people are stereo blind, but they've never heard the term stereo blindness. Most humans can take the two images from their two eyes and then combine them into a single perception in their brain, right? And it is effortless and it's three-dimensional. But there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, a lot of times it's because maybe one eye needed a lens, like a glasses, and the other eye didn't need a correction. So if you have very different sort of refractor errors in your eyeballs, that can result in stereo blindness. And if your eyes are not aligned perfectly, like your brain has very little tolerance for alignment errors. I mean, it's really small. Your eyes have to be very well aligned to objects. And it actually depends on whether the object's closer or farther from you, right? Because if you have something right at your nose, your eyes are crossed in order to see it the same way. So brain and eyeball alignment is a surprisingly fine-grained, amazing ability that people learn within months of being born, usually. And if you don't, then you can end up totally stereo blind, where you're always looking out of one eye or the other at any given time. But, that's actually a simplification I use in real life. Actually, it's not just that you're just tuned into like this screen or that screen. The eye you're not using, you do use a bit of the peripheral vision always. So you always use the peripheral vision for both eyes. But otherwise, the central vision is just tuned into one eye or the other eye. And as a result, I mean, it's wild. This is a basic... if you are like that, if you are like me and you have you're looking out of one eye at a time at any given moment, your brain wiring is different from the very first step of vision processing, which is why the first thing your brain does when it gets your two streams of vision is it puts it into the same neurons, basically, like one step into your brain. And if you mess that up or do it differently, everything downstream is affected. And so like traditionally, so people, if you have amblyopia or strabismus, you are probably, stereo blindness is your actual disability, like the name for your disability versus the description of what your eyes are doing. It means that you're seeing the world as really flat. And so we tend to knock over glasses. Usually we're clumsy. We take shorter steps. You over time learn to take shorter steps. The way you reach and grab things is different, where you actually hold on to objects for longer before you pick it up. It's like a milliseconds longer, but it's still an obvious, like sort of topographical difference to how you pick things up. And we have trouble with crowding. So if letters are kind of close together in a sign, we have trouble reading it. Again, even if like our visual acuity is perfectly fine, it's a visual processing deficit. Mm. We see colors slightly differently. Like it's wild how much it affects your life and how much they tried to like really bury it. Like, I got eye surgery when I was a little baby and my parents were told like, okay, you're fixed now. It's fine now. And it's like, no, like you literally just hid my disability from other people, but I am still not seeing normally. Like I look normal to other people, but I am not seeing the world normally at all. Yeah. And it has like consequences in your life too. Like even people don't know that they're stereo blind, but even when they don't know, they're less likely to learn how to drive because driving is scarier if you can't see in 3 dimensions. Like people who were more likely to trip and fall as older adults, like, again, even if you don't know you're stereo blind, it affects your life like in ways that are pretty profound. I think that's the way in which my brain is wired the most differently than other people. Like I think aphantasias puts me in the 2% of weirdos, and certainly prosopagnosia, face blindness puts me in the 2%, but it's the stereo blindness that is fundamentally wired my brain differently, the visual system differently than how other people's are. Right.
You'd say it affects your life the most.
And also, but it's also so invisible, right? Like, because when I didn't learn how to drive when I was a kid because I was scared, but I never admitted it to myself. I said it was for the environment. And then I realized it a lot later. I was like, no, it's because I was scared. Like I was scared. Right. I do a lot of things that are bad for the environment.
Wow. Okay. So is stereo blindness directly connected to misaligned eyes or lazy eye or?
Absolutely. If your eyes are not aligned, you're almost certainly stereo blind. There are some people if their eyes are very consistently misaligned in the exact same way, their brains can learn. It's called like anomalous correspondence or something. Their brains can actually learn to see in 3D, even though their eyes aren't aligned, but they are very, very rare. So if your eyes are misaligned, you are probably stereo blind like me. And stereo acuity is actually not just like an on or off thing. So to be a fighter pilot or a surgeon, you have to have exceptional like stereo acuity. And there's plenty of people who just have poor stereo acuity, like not for any clear reason, just their brain isn't that good at it. And so people who play sports, like this is a whole area in sports where you can really improve like a batter's performance, like a professional baseball batter's performance by giving them stereo like vision training. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So like most people could probably improve significantly in their stereo vision if they wanted to put in the time to do all the exercises and to practice it.
So when did you become aware that you were stereo blind? Was that kind of the same time you were finding about face blindness? Did it kind of happen at the same time?
It was actually like many years before, but I didn't integrate it and I didn't connect it to anything else. I learned all of this when I was interviewing a famous vision scientist named Margaret Livingstone for an article about artists. Anyway, it turns out this is actually this is the only real advantage of being stereo blind is it makes it a little bit like you're more likely to be a visual artist, especially with painting and photography. You are taking the three-dimensional world and putting it on a flat plane, and you've already done that. You're already an expert in that.
Right,
right. So I was interviewing her about that, and I was like, well, my eyes aren't aligned and I can't draw. And she's like, well, you still are stereo blind. You just didn't take it to a artistic place. And I was like, what do you mean? And then like I went to my ophthalmologist and like they're like, yeah, you're totally stereo blind. No one ever told you. And I was like, no one ever told me. So I found out through this woman, but I didn't think about it until I found out I was face blind. And I was trying to figure out why am I face blind? Because most people, it's very genetic. Like there's a strong genetic component, but they haven't been able to find a single gene. It's one of these classic, sort of increasingly common things where it's like a choir of genes and you just get a bad roll, of a few different dice. And that's how you end up face blind. But again, like these are genetically loaded dice. And anyway, but the long story short is that my family is not face blind. Like my family actually tends to be excellent at face recognition. So I was like, what the hell? And I found out that if you're stereo blind, even like you have lifelong face processing issues. Like you're not necessarily totally face blind, but you it messes up your face processing. So that's how I really started to dig in on the fact that it really was affecting my life in all these really huge ways. Being face blind also has weirdly affected my entire life in ways I had no idea. Like I've never dated anyone who was not very visually distinctive. Like I've never been asked out by anyone. I didn't learn to drive, so that like really limited me to living in big cities my whole life. There's a lot of ways that these things can invisibly shape your whole life and you have no idea.
Right. And jumping ahead to aphantasia, because that's what I'm most familiar with, the same thing happens. Like you're just used to the way you are. And then when you learn about this thing, oh, that's why I am the way I am. And that's why my wife reacts the way she reacts. And that's why, you know what I mean? Like it just solves all these riddles that you never really understood or even knew needed to be understood.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like movies that have surprise endings that make you like rethink the whole previous movie. What is it? Like I See Dead People. What was that movie called? All the M. Night Shyamalan movies are basically how I felt as I was like sort of unearthing all of this information about myself. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I have an aphantasia shirt that says, well, that explains a lot. Yeah. All right. In your book, you talked about having either temporary moments of being able to see in 3D or sometimes even permanent fixes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. That was the coolest thing that happened while I was writing my book is I did get to glimpse the world that everyone else lives in a little bit. And the easiest way to do it is with VR glasses, because the VR can really soup up the information, the dimensional information of. So probably neurotypical people, when they use VR, everything looks super 3D or kind of fakely 3D. The fakeness and the sort of souped upness is what allows people who can't normally see in 3D to suddenly see it. And, one of the people I interviewed said, the first time he saw like a rotating cube in 3D on the VR goggles, he was like ducking, like he was like, it felt like it was like coming right out of his face, and like people who learn to see in 3D in real life, they always talk about trees and branches, and they're like, all of a sudden the trees are reaching out at me. It's like scary, And and when I see trees, like right now, I'm looking at just sort of a wall of trees. And to me, I can't tell what branch is behind what other branch. But people who can see in 3D, it's like a beautiful three-dimensional sculpture. So I tried really hard to get better at 3D vision, in part because I got a before and after scan. Like I could have gotten a before and after. I could have been the first person, because like originally they didn't think adults could learn to see in 3D if you didn't learn it by the time you were like 5 or 6. They thought it was literally impossible. And then this woman who happened to be a neuroscientist, she wrote a whole book about it, Sue Barry, called Fixing My Gaze or something. And it's a great book. She was a vision scientist. And so this is like such a crazy story because she knew theoretically how 3D vision worked. And she knew what she was missing, but experientially, it was not what she expected. And it was like way cooler. And so, cause like they tell us, they're like, listen, you can tell, you don't need 3D. You can tell your hand is in front of your other hand because it's occluded, or like you can use, parallax, motion parallax to see that, the distances between things, whatever. But she's like, no, it's completely different. It's experientially so different. It's like living in a world versus just staring at it through a window or looking at a painting kind of.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, so I got glimpses into that, like, especially when it happened when I was driving and like, it seemed like my steering wheel was popping out of me, which is the same thing that happened to Sue Barry actually. And so there's something about like widening your expected sort of depth of field. Cause like, I think people like me just don't expect any depth of field. So we don't really try. But if your brain is like trying to see this and that, like you're the thing right in front of you and the thing kind of far away because you're driving, I think that like sometimes is a way to bootstrap your way into seeing in 3D a little bit. Anyway, I did this massive training program too, and I got much better at seeing in 3D. And I got my brain scanned before, so if we could see what changed, right? But unfortunately, I didn't get good enough. Like the scientist was like, listen, your brain's going to look exactly the same as before. He's like, call me if you get under 1,000 or whatever. And I was like, oh, I couldn't get, that was actually literally right where I was plateaued at. So anyway, I got access to this like software program that no one get. Like everyone should be able to access this like VR software program that can teach you to see in 3D, and because it could help millions of people. And there's really no downside except that you can start to see double, like and that's actually like a sign that you're doing it right. But medical devices are regulated and they just don't want people having access to this, like unfettered access. Mm-hmm. And I think it really sucks, honestly. I think the medical device field is a big racket because they're all like self-calibrating now, like CPAP machines and stuff. So like they're just looping in doctors because it's a racket.
Right. Yeah, I would love to try that. Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's cool, but it took a lot of talking people into it to like get me the software. Anyway, so I could still be working on my 3D vision, but I've just been like focused on other things.
Okay. I think another thing that was in the stereo blindness section was liking to be in the dark.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. So there's like so interesting. I found this, so Sue Barry actually suggested this and she sounded like embarrassed she was like, listen, I have this theory and it's probably out there, but this is my theory. And I was like, oh my God, me too. So basically, I've always thought that everyone else is like obsessed with like flashlights. Like, I'm like, listen, you're in the woods. You don't need a flashlight. Like, just walk around. Sometimes you stub your toe. Not a big deal. But all the normally sighted people actually really hate being in the dark. But I'm really used to not having as much information, I think, from my visual system. So a lot of stereo blind people are just more comfortable in the dark. And the way Sue Barry figured it out is she has a staircase that all of her family members would always turn on the light to go up and down the staircase. And she never did. And that's what made her realize that they were like more uncomfortable traveling the world without like a lot of light.
This part about stereo blindness was the most interesting to me because it was something I really didn't know anything about. We talked about skepticism earlier. It probably plays a big role here as well. And one of the quotes I wrote down from your book is it says, if someone says they can't see, we should probably believe them.
Yeah. Right? Man, I just like heard about this kid who was seeing double her whole life and no one believed her. And she was seeing double. She could have used some visual help there. I think, so the thing about stereo blindness is that usually a doctor early in your life knows that you're stereo blind, but they also know that canonically, they didn't believe that there was any cure. And so they thought the only thing they could do was to cosmetically line up your eyes. And then they just reassure your parents that it's no big deal. And so that's why it's like actually actively sort of buried by the medical industry. And I think it's done for very compassionate reasons. But the science is beginning to help, like to show that we can actually help people, and cosmetically realigning eyes actually makes it a lot harder for them to see normally in the long run. But again, we have so much stigma against misaligned eyes that getting them cosmetically aligned is a priority for many parents. And I think the medical world just goes along with it, even though it's 100% cosmetic. And we're basically doing like plastic surgery on infants and babies and young children. It kind of drives me crazy. Like, I feel like this is a big deal and no one's listening to me, but I think I also understand why no one wants to listen to me, because it is a very inconvenient sort of truth, you know?
Right. Yeah, that is so interesting. So can you talk about some of the stigma that comes with misaligned eyes?
Yeah, but I actually only recently would experience it because my eyes were cosmetically aligned my whole life. They only recently have decided to go their separate ways, which is very typical, actually. So usually it takes 2 surgeries to get your eyes in cosmetic alignment when you're a child. And then by the time you're like in your 40s, your eyes drift apart like an old married couple. And so I see people talking about getting, another surgery to get their eyes realigned again, but I've decided not to do it because, number one, I don't want eye surgery at all. It was not a delightful experience the first time. And also because I just want to be out here for strabismus awareness. I've been posting on TikTok a lot because this is like a good way to sell books. So I've been like very active on social media, and on every video, it's like someone says something mean or weird about my eyes being misaligned. And I'm like, yeah, you noticed something about me. Let me tell you more about it. So trying to use it as a learning thing. But for kids, I mean, it's really stigmatizing. I read all about the research on stigma, and kids were like more likely to hit their little dollies if their dolls had misaligned eyes. Having misaligned eyes in cartoons has long been shorthand for being like a little crazy, right? Like if you were trying to draw a crazy person or a crazy animal, you would put the eyes like kind of going in different directions. So yeah, kids are less likely to invite other kids to their birthday parties if they have misaligned eyes. Also, and then of course it continues, so people are less likely to hire a job candidate who has misaligned eyes, or people are less likely to date someone, or, it's like you're seen as less attractive if your eyes are misaligned.
In your book, you talked about how left-handedness used to carry a similar stigma, but we're over that. Do you think we'll ever get over this misaligned eye stigma?
I think it's going to be harder because as humans, we're obsessed with eye gaze direction. And this is why we have so much whites around our eyes, right? Like if you look at most other animal eyes, they don't have nearly this much like sclera or whatever it's called. And so this is actually specifically like evolved to help us see where other people are looking. And so and so people care a lot about gaze direction. And if you're talking to someone and it looks like you're not paying attention, like you're not focused totally on them, because one of your eyes is like going that direction, that actually gives people a gut feeling that you are sneaky or sort of shifty. There's a language, this is reflected in language, because the words for lazy eye in many languages means like sort of sketchy, like louche, I believe, in French. And I mean, there's a lot of words that mean both lazy eye and also like sketchy.
Great insight there. All right. What about tips and tricks on this one? Tips and tricks for navigating life with stereo blindness.
Gosh, that's so interesting. I mean, if you have a kid who's like legit stereo blind, I guess don't make them do ball sports. and probably, I mean, we actually are okay drivers. The way it's been described to me is we're not any worse than anyone else, but like, you don't want to be a commercial driver, like a truck driver, or even maybe a taxi driver if you're stereo blind. In terms of like workarounds, I mean, honestly, you already have them all. Your brain is already sort of almost seamlessly switching between your eyes and figuring out how to integrate information. But our whole worlds actually do jump a little bit. And so it can make reading harder. And as an adult, like as my eyes have drifted apart, like it is a little bit harder for me to read. I often cover one eye so that I can not have like confusing jumping happening when I'm trying to start a new line.
Tune in next week for part 2 of face blindness, stereo blindness, aphantasia, and SDAM with Sadie Dingfelder. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, follow, and engage with us, and share it with your friends and family as we continue to explore this fascinating subject. For additional information about this episode or Shane's Brain, check out the show notes. Thanks for listening to the Discovering Your Mind podcast. You are beautifully unique.